Made possible through support from the Arc of Aurora, Arc Thrift Stores, Developmental Pathways, and the Limbaugh Law Firm. A THINK+change training.
Hello, everyone in the internet world. Hani Rayleigh with the Arc of Aurora and THINK+change with the fabulous advocacy team of the Arc of Aurora, Jeff, Callie, and Petrie, here to follow up to episode 1, all about dating and relationships, if you're a person with a disability, and certainly for the folks that support people with disabilities. And we did a pretty general overview of, how you find love, things to consider, things to, talk about with your team as you move forward. But we talked about a lot of red flag hurdles. And I want to talk in this episode a little bit about how we make it work. And if you're in a loving relationship and you want to move forward in whatever way you and your loved one decide, things additionally to look into and to make sure that you are not impacted in a way that's negative, right? So first I want to talk a little bit about, we talked briefly about the marriage penalty. And we know that certainly could impact people's benefits, the services that they provide. And so what happens if you decide I'm in this loving relationship, but I don't want to be married because I don't want to impact some of those services? It wouldn't have made sense for me. Callie, do you know kind of what the next step might be, or tips and tricks?
Definitely. Yeah, I can take this one. So it's interesting in Colorado because we have something called common law marriage, which exists all throughout the country, but every state is allowed to say what makes up a common law marriage. In some states, they'll say you have to have lived together for 5 years. There's all these different things. Well, here in Colorado, we don't have that. So really, almost anybody can say I'm common law married without having the certificate of marriage, without having a big wedding, without having guests. And you might think, well, that's an easy way around it. But the issue is that it still affects you in terms of your benefits the same way that it would if you had a marriage license with this person. Yeah. And additionally, you actually lose some of the benefits that you would get with a traditional marriage license. You don't get survivor benefits if something was ever to happen to your spouse. And so it can get a little tricky. That falls in with civil unions, domestic partnerships, common law marriage. Because we have such a broad way of defining them and saying what they are, it gets a little tricky to say whether or not they will affect your benefits. So if you were to ask me, my kind of tricky way around this is to always refer to your spouse as your roommate. Because if you're living with them, they're your roommate. And just lucky bonus for you, they're a roommate who you really care about and who you want to spend your life with. You still get to see them. You still get to live with them. You still get to go on date nights. Nothing changes except that you don't have a marriage license and that you're able to keep your benefits.
Totally. So saying, gosh, I'm just going to do the common law marriage is actually not a way to avoid any kind of potential penalty. What about civil unions or anything like that? Is that a way?
Great question. So in terms of civil unions and domestic partnerships, you're still facing a lot of the same issues that can happen in terms of your Medicaid, your benefits, because you are looking at those household benefits when we're looking at assets and income limits. And you know what? It's really interesting because when it comes to civil unions and domestic partnerships, it really depends on what state you're in to decide how that looks with survivor benefits. And I'll actually, honey, I'll have to kick that one to you or the rest of my team because that's not an area that I can say I know for sure. So with survivor benefits, with civil unions, what does that look like here in Colorado?
To be honest, I think that it's pretty unique based on the situation, right? I know that civil unions have been used in Colorado for same-sex marriages. Mm-hmm. But under Colorado, we identify them as legal and binding documents. So using the term civil union doesn't sound like it's a way out of the marriage penalty either. So I really liked your idea around, having a loving roommate. And that could be what makes sense for some people. But I bet that there are folks that are like, I don't care. I'm going to marry, or I'm going to common law marry, or I'm going to get this civil union, and that's how I am going to live my life. Any thoughts about what the next step is? No one? Well, I was thinking, because if you've got like a paid caregiver or something like that, and you do decide to marry, that there is some potential benefits for having your spouse become a paid caregiver. Jeff, do you know anything about that?
I could brush on that for sure. So there's only 2 waivers that exist in Colorado where you can be a paid caregiver for your spouse. And those 2 waivers, I'll say them kind of slow and explain what they actually mean. CDAS, CDASS, which is a consumer directed waiver. And that's when, you guys are in charge of providing the services and finding the services. But that works as well as the IHSS, which stands for In-Home Support Services. You can also be a paid caregiver with that waiver. However, the most common waivers, the SLS and the DD or comp waiver, they don't allow for a paid family caregiver of a spouse. So if you're not
except for, I know one though, that so CDOS is a service delivery model. And so you can use CDOS actually if you're an SLS recipient, but for just a small number of service categories. So that's one benefit too, right? That you've got the opportunity, if you're using the SLS waiver and that's what makes sense for you. It's not available right now under the HCBS DD waiver, right? The one that's kind of that wraparound supports. But if SLS is a service waiver that works for you, you could look into that CDOS and then have potentially your spouse provide those 3 areas of care. And usually those are like,
what are those, like homemaker?
Yeah, they're really focused on in-home supports and services.
Yeah.
And so that's a total benefit too that you wouldn't otherwise have necessarily the access to. Something to consider.
Yeah, and I was also going to say too, with that in mind, I know some of this information is kind of overwhelming, but you can always get together with your team. You could talk to your advocate. I know I've been saying that a lot, but that's what we're here for. You could reach out to your advocate. You could talk to your case manager and say, hey, I want to learn a little bit more about CDOS, or I want to learn more about being a family caregiver in this, marriage. So just because you don't have the answers right away doesn't mean that we can't get together as a team and figure out what the best option is for you. For sure. And with that in mind, I kind of wanted to jump to another topic, if you guys don't mind.
Go
wedding
for it.
gifts. What do you think about when you think about wedding gifts? You think about getting a bunch of cool stuff and maybe some money, right? Well, that's awesome. I get it. But it could have an effect on your benefits. So let's talk about that a little bit. So, what they say, they call it tangible personal property. First of all, what does tangible mean? It means it's something you can really touch. It's something that's actually there. So a tangible wedding gift would be furniture, electronics, some kind of entertainment system, a toaster, a butter tray. Anything that you can physically touch or hold, that's not going to hurt you as far as your benefits go. Those are all exempt. And once again, the word exempt, I'm sure you hear it a lot, but it basically means free of charge. Like there's no liability attached. So if something's exempt, you don't have to worry about it. So under SSI and Medicaid, you can receive these tangible gifts with no concern. However,
always
that are money, cash, that can be harmful to your government benefits. Although it's fun to get cash, you really want to think about it because it's going to count as reported income, and that will affect your benefits. So what I suggest is, talk to your family, especially a lot of times parents of the groom and the bride tend to give, cash gifts. And if thinking about giving you a large gift, talk to them before the wedding about how you can do that gift so it's not going to burn you. And what I would say is there's a few ways it can be set up. It could be, you could set up a trust, or if you have an ABLE account, you can thrust it into the ABLE account. It's just, if you just take that money from your wedding and put it in your bank account, it's going to hurt you. So really,
those are great ideas.
Talk about it though. Communicate with the team. If your parents don't understand it, call a meeting together with the team so they can kind of explain what's going on.
Cool. Are there other things you have to consider outside of wedding gifts, like when it comes to your benefits or?
Yeah, there's a lot. That's the thing. Getting married is, you got to think about everything. Everything kind of is going to have an effect on you. I know Callie really explained the Social Security and the SSDI very well earlier, but just remember, I just can't say it enough. You need to report this. You need to let somebody know. And, I did a little research and I found out, before you get married, set up a consultation with a Social Security administrative representative. They'll meet with you and you'll explain that you're getting married, and they can help crunch the numbers and really let you know what you got to worry about and what's going to happen. And that meeting, I know no one likes to go down to the Social Security office, but right now it could be probably done on a video anyway, but it's totally worth your time to do before you get married. I know there's a lot of things to do, like cake and all that stuff, but Social Security benefits are something to think about. Real quick, I want to talk about HUD also. If you're, benefit from HUD, you need to know, you absolutely must report your change in marital status to the housing authority. You have some case manager over there, you need to tell that person that you're married.
So they just won't find out.
Yeah,
like they don't get notice from the city and county. No.
But it is the law, and you can get into trouble if you don't let them know, and you could possibly lose your housing. And depending on how much money your spouse makes, you might not qualify for that anyway. So that's definitely a conversation that needs to be had. And then bank accounts, I'm not going to tell you what to do with your money. Everyone is different with their money. I mean, you do have options though. I know some people that are married that have their own accounts and they like it that way. A lot of other couples like to do a joint bank account. And if you're already at the same bank, you can easily talk to a banker and combine the bank accounts, or you can look at both banks and decide which one you want to switch to and have an account together. But remember, if you're going to share your bank account, there needs to be a lot of communication going on. And I recommend that you sit down, not just with your significant other, but maybe a couple other people that know you well, and really have a conversation about how the bank accounts are going to work. Because you really don't know what it's like to share a bank account with someone. People could be spending the money you think is still there. So communication is cardinal.
Well, and that brings up, I think money and finances are huge pieces of any relationship in and outside of disability world life. Petrie, do you have any other ideas of things just worth considering if you're taking the plunge, getting married? What else do you need to know to help really make sure that that process, your life, your relationship is smooth sailing and you know what to do if there's hiccups?
Absolutely. There is a lot to consider, and whether you officially get married or perhaps take Callie's suggestion and you are in a loving roommate relationship, it's still tough to navigate marriage itself. It's a relationship and it requires work and effort and communication. And we kind of all remember those first few months when you're in love and everything's great and the other person can do no wrong, but eventually life kind of eventually creeps in, and the realities are that you're not always going to get along, and that's absolutely okay. It doesn't mean that the other person doesn't love you or that you don't love them. It doesn't mean that the relationship has to end. It's just, what do we do when we come across something that we're struggling with? And it can be something as simple as who does the laundry versus who does the dishes. And it could be more complex, even as Jeff mentioned, with money management. money is a big issue in relationships across the board. How do you spend your money? How do you save your money? What financial considerations are important for you? So you can always, if you're really struggling, and, not necessarily knowing how to resolve an issue in the marriage, you can reach out to your team. They can help you, or even just one trusted member of your team, your ARC advocates. We're happy to help navigate that communication. There's also, you can seek marriage counseling. That's a really good way to have a neutral person just kind of enter into the conversation that you and your significant other are having, or perhaps are not having, but need to have.
Yeah.
And, they can kind of help you navigate through any kind of challenges that, have cropped up for you. And, again, that can also kind of circle back to even your service supports. I mean, now it might look a little different. It might feel a little different, depending on whether or not you've had to kind of shift any services or shift a waiver. So I would just recommend, for sure to have a lot of these conversations before you actually get married, so that you both are on the same page once you kind of enter into marriage or just coupling together. Because it's a lot more difficult to be living with someone and kind of drop a whopper on your significant other, or he or she onto you. Just makes more sense to just try and have all these conversations, just so you know where people stand. It doesn't even necessarily mean that you have to agree. It's just you're communicating with the other person.
Totally. Could you use like mentorship services for some of the navigating?
I think that's a great idea, actually, for sure. They could come in and help you, kind of divvy up domestic chores, or,
Sure.
Hey, this is how we look at our finances online. We can log into the bank and we can see, what we're spending, or you create a budget, that kind of stuff.
Totally. Yeah, sometimes having a neutral party, being able to support and guide discussions or communication challenges.
And
Always.
I was going to say, I was going to add, a while back you had talked about, what was it? Getting like marriage counseling. Try to leave that to the professionals. Don't get your friends involved. I know they always want to help, but it can end up causing a lot more harm than good. And, leave it to the professionals. If you need professional help, talk to somebody. We can find you professional help. But when friends get involved, people can manipulate each other, and it can get ugly.
Totally.
It can become a little more drama than you want in your life.
Yeah. Well, and when I was thinking about the neutral party, I'm thinking that there are so many nuances with marriage, with disability benefits, and without, that I'm thinking for episode 3, I should interview someone that's an expert, like a lawyer, that can help us talk through kind of what those next steps are, like advanced directives or estate planning, or, preparing to have children and how you protect children in an instance where you have benefits, non-benefits, services, etc. So I'm going to take this series up a level and bring in an expert and see what they have to say about some of this.
I'm looking forward to that.
I can't wait
to hear too. So thank you guys for joining all of us, and thank you to the fabulous advocacy team of the Arc of Aurora for giving us a little bit more information around relationships and dating for people with disabilities and the folks that support them. But stay tuned for episode 3.
THINK+change. Talks, trainings, and tools to help in your work for or with people with intellectual and other developmental disabilities. Learn more at www.thinkchange.training.